Hello everyone and welcome to Module 6. Today we're going to be talking about honouring the land wights. We've talked about honouring the ancestors and the Disir, the Modru, the House Wight, the Norns, and now we're getting into the land wights, and in the next module we're going to talk about honouring the gods. Okay, but first for this module we're going to talk about honouring the land wights. Or land spirits, is another way of saying. Okay, so what are we going to cover in this lesson? Firstly, we're going to talk about what are the localized cults, okay, and the importance of those. We're going to talk about what land spirits actually are, and then a bit about the worship of the land spirits and look at some of the history. Then we're going to go into how to honor the land spirits, what offerings to give to the land spirits, an important concept called the Vardtrad. The outdoor altars, like if you want to set up an outdoor altar to the land spirits, and then a bit about a warning and protection. Okay, so first things first, then let's talk about those localized cults. So as we've mentioned in various other videos so far, heathenry is not a standard religion across all areas. Okay, it differed from place to place, from time to time. Different peoples had different ideas and interpreted concepts in different ways. Spirits were seen in different ways in different areas. And so heathenry is a very localized religion. It's not a pan-Germanic religion where everybody was worshipping the same thing. Okay, it's not like, say, Christianity or Buddhism or Islam or something where they're very much a universal and they're quite standardized. In heathenry, every local area had its own spirits, its own way of interpreting and interacting with those spirits. And there was just variation across everywhere. And then that is good for us because it means that we can build a heathenry that is local to us, that is unique to our area. Okay. Now, local land spirits were probably just as important as the major deities. Okay. In fact, there's many examples in the text of them actually being central to people's worship. So land spirits are not just a side thing. They're something that we should take seriously. We should honor them and make them a key part of our local version of heathenry. Okay. So as I said, each family or small community probably had their own special spirits that differs according to their needs and their landscape. So if they lived by a river or by the sea, then they're going to have river spirits, and sea spirits are going to be very important. If they get their living from, say, fishing and stuff, again, sea spirits are going to be important. Whereas if they're in the middle of the forest or next to a mountain, it's going to be the mountain spirits or the forest spirits that are most important to them. Okay, so their landscape is really important for determining what spirits they worship, and it will be the same for you. You'll need to think about what the land is like where you are, what the landscape is like. You'll need to do some research into the landscape, into its history, into its geology, into its flora and fauna, which is the animals and the plants and things, so you can get an understanding of what the land spirits are like. And the sacred places, this is really important, were local ones. Okay, we don't have a lot of examples of sort of really big central holy places. Okay, a lot of the ones, people didn't travel very far often in there, unless they were like traders and things like that. Often people stayed put in their communities for their whole lives. And so any sacred places would have been local sacred places, local sacred trees, local sacred rocks, local sacred lakes, and so on. And spirits often dwelled in these particular local places. That's what helped to make them sacred. So it could be a tree, a rock, waterfall, a grove, anything like that. Okay. They didn't have single set doctrines. Okay. If we look at the texts that we've got in the lore, there are contradictions. There are different beliefs being shown. For instance, think about the afterlife. You've got Valhalla, you've got hell, you've got reincarnation, you've got various halls of different gods, and so on. So there's lots of different beliefs. We talked about the Alfar in our last module, and how they were seen in different ways by different people, or so it seems anyway. So there's no single set doctrine either. Okay, And over time, we can see things changing in terms of the worship. We can see, for instance, that hell was probably the main afterlife for a lot of people early on. And then as you get warriors going out and dying on the battlefield far away, well, they're no longer close by to be worshipped in mounds and all that sort of thing. So then they need another place. So they bring up this idea of Valhalla. So that which is quite a late development. So you can see that people's beliefs and ideas changed over time. We saw in the very first module, in the history module, about how it started off with more outdoor worship and then became more indoor worship as we got more sort of centralized. So worship changed over time as well. Okay, and we can do the same thing. We can modernize heathenry today to bring it up to date. Now that doesn't mean we change everything, but it does mean that how we interpret things, the particular spirits we worship, and so on, are going to be local to us and based on the way we live our lives now, not based on how people lived 2,000 years ago. Okay. So, what are land spirits? Okay, so there again, this is it's like the Alpha and the Alpha and the Disir and the Modru and the Norns and stuff. It's very slippery as to what they actually are in the text, and different people can become different, or different entities can be different things. So they can sometimes be elves, they can sometimes be Norns, they can sometimes be the dead, etc., or dwarves or something. So they cross over a lot with the elves, okay, in particular, and with the dwarves sometimes as well. Like for nowadays in Iceland, when we talk about the elves, or when they talk about elves in Iceland, they often associate them almost with areas of land and as guardians of land and things like that, which is more of a land spirit role. So there is a lot of crossover, and folklore has, in particular, sort of mixes them up a lot. So a land wight or land vetter is essentially a land spirit or a nature spirit. Okay, they have lots of different names. They're found all over the world in every single historic culture. There are these types of spirits of the land, okay? And there will be spirits of the land near where you live, even if it's in the city, okay? Now, Claude Lecoultre, he's written a really good book called Demons and Spirits of the Land, which I highly recommend you read. And he says, the term land spirit is my translation for the Latin genius loci, the place spirit, okay? In other words, a numen, a daimon, attached to a specific place that it owns and protects against intrusion. By place, I mean an uninhabited land that is still wild and uncultivated. They are spirits who hid in wild virgin nature. And he says, every forest has its spirits, every spring its lady, every river has malevolent beings in its depths. The dwarfs dance on the moors, that the marshes are teeming with will-o'-wisps, which, we are told, are lost souls, and that the mountains are home to demons and wild folk who enjoy causing landslides, avalanches, and floods. Okay, so what he's saying here is essentially it's a local spirit of a place, a sort of a supernatural being that owns and protects that place, particularly if it's uncultivated and humans haven't come in and cultivated the land or built things. But we have seen obviously that there are house spirits and building spirits, basically, where a land spirit could become a spirit of the house instead. And it's saying they're everywhere, basically, every forest, every spring, every river, and so on. Now, Stephen Pollington, the scholar, he says that the land spirit resided in a small and defined area. It had some power over only a small part of the natural and human worlds. Within its proper location, it had greater knowledge and power than a human, but far less than any god. Okay, so it's a step down from a god, but a step up from a human, and it's very much a localized spirit. It sticks to that particular place. Now it can move, okay, and if humans come in and wipe out a forest, for instance, that spirit will likely move away if it doesn't want to become a house spirit. But normally it's very localized. It looks after that particular piece of land, protects it, ensures it prospers and everything grows well and things like that. Okay. So Jormundur Ingi Hansson, so he's the former high priest of the Icelandic Astruar Felagaith. He says they are spirits and they in some way control the safety of the land, the fertility of the land, and so on. They are tied to a spot in the landscape, to a huge rock, to a mountain, or to a specially beautiful place. Okay, so again, we've got this thing of local spirit, a guardian spirit, a spirit who ensures fertility for the land. Okay, if you've got places nearby you that are particularly awe-inspiring, or maybe there's just this really big rock in a forest near you, or there's this really old tree somewhere nearby, that might be places, for instance, where a spirit might live. But they might even be a guardian spirit of an entire country, as we're going to see in a minute. Okay, they can take many shapes. So they're normally not visible to us, but in the folklore it says that they can become visible, and they can take shapes like humans, animals, fairies, dragons, dwarves, etc. But their role, duties, and localization remains the same. Okay, they're very much they can appear to us in different ways, particularly maybe in dreams and stuff, in a way that we might understand them better. But they're still very local. Okay. Now, if you see in the picture on the right there, you've got something called the linden worm, which is in trolldom, in Norse magical practice. It's very important, both for helping you to gain magic powers and for use in magic. But interesting, it's a worm, it's a serpent, okay, that lives under the linden tree. And it would be classified as a spirit of the land. And often that's what we see in the lore, is that you often see the land spirit interpreted as a dragon or a serpent of some kind. Okay, a little bit like the house spirit was. Okay, and we can see underneath that you've got the red dragon of Wales. Now there are texts that talk about a white dragon of England and a red dragon of Wales, and they're fighting each other. And again, this is personifications of the spirits of the land. Okay. Lakuta says the multiplicity of forms assumed by land spirits clearly shows they are primarily natural forces, numens, that can incarnate in any creature or even any object they choose, either dwelling within it or possessing it. So it's not just that they can show themselves in a particular way, they can inhabit another creature. They can inhabit an object. So they could be even in, say, a sword or something, or a rock, something like that. So unknown forces exist that sometimes assume a shape, such as that of a human or animal, or even an inanimate object. So that's essentially a definition that Lakuta also gives for what a land spirit is. Okay, it's some sort of unknown force. Okay, now, as we said, they're guardian spirits, okay, often. And on the right here, you can see a picture of the Icelandic coat of arms, okay. Now, there's a very famous story in St. Olaf's saga, okay, about this man who wants to go and invade, or this king of Norway, basically, and he wants to go and invade Iceland because he's not very happy about the people there. And so he sends this wizard or save man or magical practitioner, okay, in a spirit form to go and spy on Iceland and find the best place to land. But each place he tries to land, he encounters these four spirits, or one in each place, along with all their sort of underling spirits, okay. So he comes across a dragon, he comes across an eagle, he comes across a bull, and he comes across a giant, okay? And they defend and stop him from being able to land and have a look at the island. So, and then they are basically, they've been put onto the Icelandic coat of arms now as land spirits, as defenders of Iceland. So these land spirits can be more than just a tiny little place that they look after. They can be actually over a whole country or a whole area of land. And based on this text, it might be that there are senior and lower level land wights, okay? Because in the text it says, he saw that all the mountains and hills were full of land wights, some big and some small. Then a big dragon came down the valley, followed by many serpents, toads, and adders. So it seems that you've got this big dragon who's like the more superior land wight, and then he oversees all the other land wights in the forms of serpents, toads, adders, and things. Or maybe he oversees all the creatures of the land. Different ways of interpreting it, basically. But the idea basically is that there are these big, really important land spirits, and whatever country you're from, it will be the same for you. Okay, there's likely to be certain larger scale land spirits over that place, as well as a smaller, lower level land spirits. Okay, Wikipedia, it says, they protect and promote the flourishing of the specific places where they live, which can be as small as a rock or a corner of a field, or as large as a section of a country. Okay, so as I said, it can be small, they can be large in terms of their land area that they protect, and they make sure it flourishes. And they have command and mastery over animals in their area. Okay, so, and I would add actually plants as well. So if you want a good relationship with the animals and plants of the land, getting to know the land spirit first is really important. Okay. Okay, so let's continue a bit more into the land spirits. So, as I said, they can become house spirits if you're taking over their land. So, if you go and build a house on their land, the land spirit there may choose to become the house spirit in that house. Not always, but it may do. Okay. It's possible that gods were originally spirits of place. Okay, and then they sort of upgraded as people worshipped them more. So if we think about the matronae, the mothers, the modru that we talked about in the last module, these were often talked about as the mothers of this river, or the mothers of the eastern peoples, or the mothers of that particular place. Okay, so they seem to have been actually spirits of place, which are sort of elevated up. Okay. And you often see goddesses of springs and rivers. In England, we've got the River Severn, and the goddess of that is called Sabrina, or Hafren in the ancient Celtic. And there's lots of other examples as well. Lakuta, he says, Siegfried Gutenbrunner's study of the inscriptions found in German regions has shown that many gods and goddesses were inextricably linked or connected with a specific place, and thus were originally land spirits. Okay, so here we've got studies showing that the gods are normally gods of particular places first. Okay, spirits of the dead can also become land spirits. So you've got the saga of Bardur Snæfellsas. He dies and he goes into the mountain and is worshipped and called a mountain spirit. Okay, so the dead can become a land spirit. I mean, we don't know where land spirits originally come from. Perhaps a lot of them are originally the dead, human dead or animal dead. They may, in fact, even stay in their graves to watch over an area. Okay, that's why we have these big, great grave mounds, and they talk about people living in them and stuff like that. They can be scared away. Okay, in the top right-hand corner, you can see a ship's head from a Viking ship. And under the Icelandic law code from 930, ships have to remove these dragon heads from their boats when they see the land, because otherwise it was thought they could frighten the land spirits. Okay. They can also use sort of dragon heads and things like that in curses. So in Egil's saga, Egil Skallagrimsson, he sets up this Nistong pole, okay, which is a pole for cursing, basically. He didn't like the king and queen of the country, and so he wanted to drive them out. So he sets up this pole and he says, it scares the land spirits, and he says, don't let them have any rest until they've driven the king and queen from the land, which is eventually what happens. So you can scare land spirits, okay? That said, they are guardians of a place, okay? You can also annoy land spirits. If you kill too many animals or you take too many resources from a piece of land, that will irritate them, okay? Saxo talks about the voyage of Thorkilus, and he says that basically he warns his companions not to slaughter more animals than they need, because otherwise they're going to annoy the land spirits, or the guardian spirits of place. And of course they do that, and then they get in trouble because of it. Now, if you think, so land spirits, they can become house spirits, and probably house spirits can become land spirits. But there is a difference, okay? So unlike house spirits or farm spirits, land spirits are not bound to a particular family or grave, okay? So they tend to be instead specifically to a piece of land, or like I said, they can be driven out to other places, but they're not bound to a particular family, okay, or a grave site. That said, there are guardian spirits of cemeteries, okay, which is usually the first being that is buried there, becomes the guardian spirit of that cemetery. Okay, so let's talk a bit more now about the actual worship of land spirits. What was happening in the past? How do we know about that? Is it really that important to worship the land spirits? Well, let's see what it says. So the 6th century bishop, Martin of Braga, he says, many are those who remain in the sea, the rivers, the springs, or the forests. Ignorant folk worship them as gods and offer them sacrifices. Okay, so we've got here an account of people worshipping these land spirits and giving them sacrifice. 563, we've got CE, we've got Gregory of Tours, and he complains of priests who allow the persistence of a worship of stones, trees, and springs, places designated by the pagans, okay? So people are worshipping at stones, at trees, at springs. Now, are they actually worshipping the literal stones, trees, and springs? Probably not. They're probably worshipping the actual spirits of those things. The Epistola Canonica, again 6th century, mentions people who worship springs and trees. The Council of Agda demanded 3 years, okay, of just bread and water if you worshipped at such places. So you have to do sort of a penance or punishment for worshipping springs and trees, for just eating bread and water. 5th century, Caesarius of Arles has members who would not chop down and burn the sacred trees or cease speaking vows at the springs and fountains. He said, none should worship trees, and if you still see people worshipping trees or springs, condemn them, and do not pray by wells and springs. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of information here. People believe they're sacred trees and they won't chop them down or burn them. They speak vows at springs and fountains, or at water sources. Okay, they worship the trees or springs. They pray by the wells and the springs as well. Okay, so these places, wells, springs, rivers, trees, rocks, they all seem to be very sacred places inhabited by sacred spirits, okay, land spirits. Now, at the Synod of Nantes, which is 7th century, said there were sacred trees where no one dared cut a branch, and people worship the stones in ruinous places and in the forests. So again, we've got this evidence of sacred trees where you're not allowed to cut the branches, and people worshipping stones, okay? You've got a Carolingian sermon which mentions the sacred trees of Jupiter and Mercury. So Jupiter and Mercury are Roman gods, but in this context, they would have been associating, basically associating Germanic gods with Roman deities. So Jupiter would have been Thor, Mercury would have been Woden or Odin. So we can see that some trees are actually associated with gods, not just land spirits, but gods themselves. You've got Permin of Reichenau, which says, do not worship idols, trees, remote places, wells, or the intersection of roads, splaying your hand on tree trunks, casting bread and wine into springs. Do not hang at crossroads or in trees, replicas of human limbs. Okay, so now we've got even more evidence of what's going on. So we know from this, they're worshipping idols, they're worshipping trees, they're worshipping in remote places, they're worshipping wells. Now we've got the intersection of roads mentioned. So this is like a crossroads where two roads cross each other, okay? And we've got, what are they doing exactly? So they're splaying your hands on tree trunks. So they're putting their hands on their tree trunks. They're casting bread and wine into springs. So they're giving offerings of bread and wine, okay, and putting them into the spring. And in trees and crossroads, they're putting replicas of human limbs. So maybe a replica of a foot or a hand or an arm. Why are they doing this? Well, often this was associated with healing. So they're asking these spirits, these land spirits, for healing. Okay. So now we've got another example. So we've got guardian and protection. We've got fertility. Now we've got healing as things that the land spirits can do. Okay. You've got the treatise to catechize the peasantry, which mentions, again, sacrifices being made in remote places. Okay, so people are going into nature and making sacrifices there. Homily on the sacrileges mentioned the sacrifice of animals whose flesh was eaten. This was on ancient altars and in sacred groves. So again, we've got sacrifice of animals, we've got the flesh then being eaten, and this is using altars and groves. Charlemagne's capitulary for the Saxon regions, now we're at the 8th century, they banned banquets given in honor of demons. So there's evidently meals and banquets and feasts given in honor of these land spirits, okay, and gods as well in this case. The Council of Agde mentions that men believed a numinous being was residing in such places. Okay. You've got the Canon of Edgar, which prohibits well worshippings and vain practices which are carried on with various spells, with various other trees and stones. So again, you've got the wells, you've got the trees, you've got the stones, okay? You've got worshipping them, you've got doing some sort of spells with them, etc. The Synod of Salzbox, 1092, mentions sacrifices to wells. Severus, the Bishop of Bourges, cut down a tree because it was dedicated to the devil. So we can see certain trees are dedicated to particular spirits, okay, or particular gods probably in this case. Saint Barbatus in the 7th century, he topples a sacred tree where the Lombards hung the hides of slain animals, meat, and so forth. Why they do that? Probably they believed that the tree was associated with a god or a spirit, okay, and it's obviously a sacred tree to them because of that. So we can see lots and lots and lots of examples. I'm going to go through some more in a minute, of basically mostly church leaders complaining about this pagan worship going on and inadvertently telling us exactly what they were doing so that we can do it ourselves. 725, you've got St. Boniface, who's cut down a sacred oak, which was worshipped by the Hessians. You've got Adam of Bremen mentioning a spring at which pagans are accustomed to make their sacrifices. This was at Uppsala, the temple. Okay, so you've got Gregor of Tours that says pagans, as if offering libations to the lake, through linen clothes and garments, pelts of wool, many models of cheese and wax and bread. Okay, so they're giving libations. Okay, that's drinks offerings, linen and clothes and garments. Models of cheese and wax and bread. Okay, so not actually. Oh no, yeah. So this is model of cheese and wax and bread. These are models of perhaps gods or spirits made out of cheese or wax and bread. Okay, so they're giving all these things into a lake. So we've got wells, lakes, trees, springs, stones, rivers, all sorts. Okay, and now we're seeing the types of sacrifices. There's meat, there's bread, there's wax, there's cheese, there's clothes. This is interesting because, as we said when we were talking about the house spirit, you shouldn't give clothes to the house spirit. But clearly here, when we're talking about land spirits, maybe it's fine. Alfric in the 11th century said of the pagans, they bring offerings to an earth-fast stone and to trees and to well springs as witches teach. Okay, so again, they're bringing offerings, stones, trees, wells. Okay. Wulfstan, he forbids the worship of wells and the worship of trees and the worship of stones. So again, wells, trees, stones. Canute in the Winchester Code said heathenry is the worship of idols, whether one worships heathen gods and the sun or the moon or fire or flood or wells or stones or any kind of forest trees. So that's a definition of what heathenry is. It's worshipping statues of gods. It's worshipping the sun and the moon, spirits of fire, of water, spirits of wells and stones and trees. Okay, that's heathenry. There were prohibitions from the church against eating and drinking at places that are sacred to pagan deities, okay, which is usually out in nature. So clearly eating and drinking is part of the worship of these land wights, these land spirits. Okay, that seems to be a really key part. Some sort of sacrifices, and then also eating and drinking and feasting. Gildas in the 6th century, he says people paid divine honor to mountains, fountains, or hills or rivers. So we've got mountains again, fountains, hills, rivers. So this is like springs and water sources. So basically lots of natural places people were honoring the spirits at. And the Indiculus Superstitionum ad Paganarum, in the 9th century, it prohibits making vows or sacrifices or eating in honor of demons at springs, trees, and groves. It also prohibits practices carried out on top of rocks, like oaths, and sacrifices at wells. So we've got more examples of what they're doing. So they're making vows and sacrifices at these places. They're eating feasts in honor of the spirits. They're carrying out oaths as well. Okay, so all these things are being done at natural places like springs, trees, groves, etc., rocks. Okay, so that's a lot of the sort of the examples from the church history. Okay, where they've condemned a lot of things. So let's have a look quickly at what does it say in the actual lore that we've got. Okay, the texts. So you've got Landnamabok, which mentions Thor Snepil of Lunder. Okay, and it says he worshipped a grove of trees, and Eyvinder paid worship to the stones of Gunnar, and Thorstein Rednose worshipped a waterfall near his home. Okay, so worshipping groves of trees, stones, waterfalls. Okay, these are where these spirits live. You've got the laws of Gulathing in Norway, which condemn believing in the land spirits, whether found in groves or mounds or waterfalls. So again, we've got the association of land spirits, in particular, with these things. Okay, so it's interesting. Waterfalls keep coming up now. The Law Code of Gotland mentions Trua al Holt, which means to believe in the hills, and Trua al Huaga, to believe in the mounds. Okay, as in believing that there's spirits in these things. They also prohibit sacrifices of all kinds, as well as the old pagan customs. May no one invoke groves, mounds, pagan gods, sanctuaries, or enclosed spaces with food or drink. Okay, so it's clear there that they're invoking these things. They're going to these things. They're calling on them as a spiritual place, but they're also using food and drink at them. So again, it's this idea of feasting with the spirits on their behalf. Adam of Bremen, he says, they even regarded with reverence leafy trees and springs. In 1220, Oliver of Paderborn, he says, the ancient Prussians worshipped the nymphs of forests and rivers. In the 15th century, Jerome of Prague said, they worshipped trees sacred to demons. So this is all into Christian times now, okay? You've got Alcuin's Vita Sancti Willibrordi, which says that Frisians would draw water in silence from a spring. So why would they be silent? Clearly they saw it as some sort of sacred practice, sacred place. The 13th century Norway law forbade believing that land spirits lived in groves and mounds and waterfalls. Saxo in the Voyage of Thorkilus mentions, we talked about this earlier, that he warns his companions not to slaughter too many animals or they might irritate the guardian spirits of place. Okay. Hawksbock, it mentions a bishop who complains that women take their food and bring it to piles of stones or under slabs and bless it to the land wights and then eat it. so that the land wights should then be gracious to them, and so that they should have a better farm than before. Now, this one's a really important text as far as I'm concerned, because it gives, again, some more detail about what's going on here. Okay, so there's these women, they're getting some food and they're taking it to these sacred places, a pile of rocks, etc. Okay, they then bless it to the land wights, and they're dedicating it basically to the land wights, and then they're eating it. Okay, now I'd imagine they're probably also doing some sort of giving some of it over as a sacrifice to the land wights as well. Why? So the land wights will be gracious to them and to help their farm. Okay, so these are some examples of what you could do. Okay, if you want to honor the land wights, you can take these customs of making sacrifices and oaths at these places, of taking some food. You could literally go on a picnic to a place you believe is sacred, where you think there's a land spirit probably residing. You can bless it to the land wight, pray to the land wights. You can give them some as an offering, and then you can eat it. Okay, as a picnic, and that would be a great way of following ancient heathen customs, modernized essentially, as well, and honoring the land spirits of a place where you live. Now, Cormac's saga, it mentions making a sacrifice of cattle to elves at a hill for healing. So again, we see the healing side of things. Now, obviously, this is talking about elves rather than land spirits, but there are beings that live in the hill, okay, and they can heal. Okay, so again, a possible example of the ability of these spirits to heal people. Christney saga says talks about there being a stone at Gildra, and the parents of Codran made sacrifices to this stone. Okay, and it says it's where their tutelary spirit who guarded their land lived. Okay, they have a tutelary spirit, so there's a spirit of that particular land that they particularly worship and honor, and because it guards that land, they worship it at a stone. They make sacrifice to it at a stone. Okay, so then we've got this idea of these Landisesteiner, which we talked about them in when we talked about them in the module on the Disir. And this means the rocks of the Landisir. So the Disir are associated here with some rocks, with some land. Okay. In Roman era Germany, it says that people raised altars and inscriptions not only to Roman and Germanic deities, but to the genius loci, the spirit of the place, or in one instance, to the presides huiis loci, the protectors of this place. And in another, the tutelae loci, the guardians of this place. Okay, so that's quotes from Artroth Volume 2. So it's not just that they're raising it to these altars and inscriptions to deities, but also to the spirits, guardians of the place. Okay, so it shows that they're quite important as well to people. Romans had a practice of prayer before cutting a tree. It says, before cutting trees, it's necessary to make a sacrifice and say a prayer beginning with, if you are a god or goddess. So it suggests that they saw that not every tree, but some trees did have a god or goddess dwelling in them, or spirit indwelling in them, or a land spirit in them. And therefore, you have to be very careful if you're going to cut them first, because you need to make a sacrifice, you need to pray and basically say sorry and warn them what's going to happen and things like that. We've got other evidence from archaeology. We've got a lot of weapons that have been thrown into rivers. We've got a lot of bodies, or not a lot, but we've got some bodies that were preserved in bogs that look like they may have been sacrifices. Okay, so are these sacrifices to the water spirits, to the bog spirits? Maybe. H.R. Ellis Davison, she says, the place where men sought contact with the supernatural powers was for the most part in the open air. In the works of Greek and Latin writers, we hear repeatedly of sacred groves and woods and groves, sanctuaries in forest clearings and on hilltops, beside springs and lakes and on islands, and of places set apart for the burial of the noble dead. Okay, that's in her book, Myths and Symbols in Pagan Europe. Okay, so again, example of worship of land spirits in the open air. in sacred groves and woods and forest clearings and hilltops, springs, lakes, and burial places. And Tacitus, in Germania, he says, their holy places are woods and groves, and they apply the name of deities to that hidden presence which is seen only by the eye of reverence. Okay, so again, talking about worship in woods and groves. Okay, so that's the what. Okay, what are land spirits? What does the history say about land spirits? Things like that. So now let's talk a little bit about why we should worship the land spirits. Okay, and then in the next video, we're going to talk about how we worship the land spirits. So why should we worship the land spirits? Locutus says this: it was rain, elsewhere it was healing. The primary considerations were food and health. The hope was to have enough water for the crops and enough sun for them to grow. They also wanted wild game to be plentiful. Neutrality or kindness was desired from the local spirits. People wanted the spirits to leave them alone, which is to say they didn't want the spirits to send any illness with their invisible arrows, nor to pester the livestock. Okay, so he's talking about the different things that people worshipped them for. So it might be for rain, it might be for healing, for food and health, water for the crops and sun for them to grow, plentiful wild game, or just literally just some neutrality or some kindness. They don't want the spirits to get angry with them and attack them and send illness using like elf shot, their arrows, or to pester their livestock and ruin them, basically. So it was about very basic needs of survival. Okay, health, healing, crops, fertility, or just don't annoy me, don't hurt me, basically, type thing. He goes on to say, much worship was not addressed to the high gods of the Germanic pantheon, but to the numinous forces closer to man, which therefore held a greater significance for his daily life. Okay, so here it's saying that they didn't worship the high gods of the pantheon all the time. The more important ones were the ones that were close to him. So maybe this is the ancestors, but particularly when it comes to them being farmers and things and trying to survive, it would have been these land spirits, okay, that they were honoring. It says, if it's treated well, meaning if it is shown respect and given offerings on specific dates, the spirit becomes a valuable assistant, but it can be mischievous at times. So as we've emphasized throughout this course, these spirits are not piggy banks to go to, or like your bank in the sky where you ask for something and then it gives it to you. Okay, they have their own agendas, they're their own beings. Okay, they can get angry at you as well as help you. They can be valuable assistants if you respect them and give offerings, but if you don't, they can be mischievous and cause problems. Okay, so be aware of that. The land spirit was the one originally there, okay, and long before humanity. So the land belongs to that land spirit originally, okay? It does not belong to you. It belongs to that land spirit. And it was there long before humans were here. If you want to take land to use yourself, you should make peace with the land spirit first, okay? If you've got a piece of land and you say you want to build a house on it, or you move into a house and you want to do something with the garden, like, or extend the house or whatever, remember that it's owned by a land spirit first, okay? Or in a house case, it's a house spirit. You need to make peace with that first, okay? So land spirits can bring prosperity to livestock and success to hunters, okay? If they're the ones that oversee and control the animals in the area and the plants, then obviously they were the ones who will make it possible for you to find, I don't know, a deer to shoot, or to find the game that you're looking for, particularly if you're a hunter, okay? In Landnamabok, it talks about a mountain dwelling spirit who comes to Bjorn and offers him a partnership, okay? And he says yes. It's in the dream. He says yes. Let's do this partnership. And so a billy goat comes and joins his herd, and that means then he starts to prosper lots. His herds grow a bit large, and the texts talk about basically those who have second sight, those who can see spirits, say that they can see land spirits accompanying him to the thing assembly. as well as helping his brothers when they hunt or fish. Okay, so when you make a partnership with a land spirit, they really help in terms of prospering you and prospering your family as well. Okay. So, as I said, the spirit of place is also the master of the animals there in that place. Okay. So it can help hunters. But equally, many Germanic folk tales mention someone killing an animal in a forest when they shouldn't do, and they haven't asked for permission. And then a land spirit confronts them and demands compensation. Okay. And then they've got to find some way of compensating that land spirit. They might even get into a battle and get killed or something like that. Okay. So remember that the world is inhabited by land spirits. Those land spirits own these places before we do. Okay. And we should respect them. We should ask permission for things. They can help us, but we've got to be careful. Okay. They can bring prosperity and guidance and prophecy. So in Kristni Saga, which we've already talked about before when we talked about dreams, it mentions a farmer who has a spirit living in a stone nearby, whom he calls his harvest man and prophecy man, that visits in his dreams and tells me about many things that haven't yet happened. He protects my livestock and reminds me of what I must accomplish or beware of. Okay, so is bringing prosperity, he's bringing guidance and prophecy. He's telling him what he can accomplish, but also what to beware of. Okay, he's protective of the livestock. So there's lots of benefits here, okay, in your daily life for creating a relationship with the land spirit. So let's summarize this, okay, and then we'll finish this video here and we'll go on to the next video. So, summary, heathenry was a very localized religion, okay? The spirits worshipped were local spirits. There were gods that were common in areas, but they were seen in different ways, and people's daily lives were more impacted by the local land spirits. Therefore, their religion was more localized because of that, okay? They worshipped the local spirits. They went to the local spring, the local rock, the local forest or grove, okay? Rather than traveling to some central holy place. There's very few examples of that. Land wights are the supernatural guardians of a place, okay? Usually there's a natural or a wild place, and they're often tied to that place unless they're expelled by humans. The spirits can appear in various forms, as we said, and are called by many different names. We talked about like the dragons and serpents and humans or animal form or even object forms. They may also exist in some kind of hierarchy of spirits in an area. So maybe the higher level land wights and lower level land wights. Both the spirits and the land and animals they protect need to be treated with respect. Okay, so not just the spirits, but also the land itself and the animals. And this is why heathenry is actually quite an environmental religion, an eco-friendly religion, because it's very much, we see that the earth itself is seen as a goddess, but also there are these land spirits which we must treat with respect, and also treat the land and the animals under them with respect as well. And that leads naturally into a sort of an environmental focus. Otherwise, misfortune will follow. Okay, so they are usually dangerous. They are not tame. They are not your friend. They are not your piggy bank in the sky. They are dangerous. They have their own agendas. They are like wild animals, essentially. Okay, so you've got to treat them with respect, and you can enter into a partnership with them. Just be careful. So this is a major part of pagan practice. It's one that we see repeatedly condemned by the church and in law codes. Okay, throughout 5, 6, 7 centuries, even during Christian times. Okay, we see this going on. So clearly, it's a really important part of heathen practice in the old days. Okay, and so it should be an important part of our local religion. Okay, our localized heathenry. It's the worship of spirits of trees, of rocks, of springs, of wells, of waterfalls, and other natural places. Okay, if you have a big rock near you, a big mountain, a spring, a river, a well, the ocean, waterfall, a forest, there are going to be land spirits there, and they're the ones that should form a part of your religious practice, okay? And we'll talk about how exactly you do that in the next video. But often this worship included giving sacrifices, making vows, and feasting with food and drink, okay? So those are the three big things we see throughout the history, throughout the text that we looked at. Sometimes the land spirit dwelt very close to your land, but other times it needed to be sought out in more wild places further afield. So we saw that example of the harvest man, the prophecy spirit. He was on a rock on someone's land. He lived in that rock. But in other cases, you actually have to go out to a wild place. And we saw examples of that with the churches condemning people going out to wild places. People could also form special bonds with the local land spirit who will communicate to them in dreams and bring prosperity, healing, advice, and luck to their land. So you can form these special partnerships, okay? It's also important to get on good terms with them if you are on their land. If you go to a place in nature, a more uncultivated place, you're entering their land. You should be respectful. You should pray first, maybe give a little offering as you enter, that sort of thing. Just acknowledge that it's their land, not yours, okay, when you're coming through. So I'm going to finish that video here, and in the next video, we're going to talk in detail about how do we actually go about honouring the land spirits.